turning point of modern thought, standing quietly in the shadow of towering names like Hegel and Kant, one man laid the foundations for an idea that would redefine how we understand ourselves. Søren Kierkegaard. Often called the father of existentialism, Kierkegaard stood at a crossroads where rational philosophy began to crumble under the weight of human emotion, personal doubt, and spiritual longing. His work, unlike that of many other philosophers, didn't aim to build a grand system. It aimed to dismantle the illusion that such a system could ever replace the raw, uncertain experience of being human. Born in 1813 in Copenhagen, Denmark, Kierkegaard came from a devoutly Christian and deeply melancholic household. His father, a former shepherd who became wealthy later in life, was burdened by guilt and religious anxiety, casting a heavy psychological and spiritual shadow over the young Søren's childhood. From an early age, Kierkegaard was surrounded by talk of death, sin, and salvation. 7 of his 8 siblings died in childhood. This early exposure to mortality and despair became the soil in which his later philosophy would grow. And yet Kierkegaard was not merely a brooding soul. He was witty, brilliant, and fiercely independent. He studied theology and philosophy at the University of Copenhagen, excelling in both. But his true education came not from books alone. It came from wrestling with life itself. One of the most defining events in his life was the breaking off of his engagement to Regina Olsen, a woman he deeply loved. Kierkegaard ended the relationship not because of a lack of feeling, but because he believed that his personal calling to explore the inner workings of the self and of faith would inevitably cause her pain. He carried the weight of this decision for the rest of his life, and it became a recurring symbol in his writings, the painful sacrifice demanded by authentic existence. Unlike other thinkers of his time who focused on society, science, or metaphysics, Kierkegaard turned his gaze inward. He asked a far more personal question: what does it mean to truly exist, and how does one become, in his words, a true self? Kierkegaard saw modern life as a performance, a life lived in abstraction, hiding behind roles, systems, and social expectations. Most people, he believed, live in what he called the aesthetic stage, a life defined by distraction, entertainment, and the avoidance of deeper meaning. This stage isn't necessarily bad, but it's hollow. When life becomes difficult, or when the illusions begin to crack, this aesthetic way of living falls apart. And that's when despair sets in. But for Kierkegaard, despair isn't the enemy, it's a signal. It's the moment you realize you are not yet who you are meant to be. It is the beginning of the inward journey. From here, one must move into what he called the ethical stage, a mode of living in which a person takes responsibility for their existence. No longer guided by the crowd or empty pleasures, the ethical individual tries to live with integrity, purpose, and commitment. This stage demands choices, often painful ones, and a recognition that meaning isn't given to you from the outside. You must create it. You must choose it. But Kierkegaard didn't stop there. He believed that even ethical living had its limits. No matter how responsible, virtuous, or principled we try to be, we still face the limits of reason, the inevitability of death, and the chaos of the unknown. And this is where his most profound and radical idea comes in: the leap of faith. Kierkegaard's leap isn't blind belief. It's an act of courage, made in full awareness of uncertainty. It's choosing to live as if there is meaning, even when no system can prove it to you. This, for him, was the religious stage, where one lives in relationship with something higher, not because it's rational, but because it's necessary for becoming whole. For Kierkegaard, faith was not about comfort or conformity. It was about risk, paradox, and the terrifying freedom of confronting your existence alone. He used the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac to illustrate this. The moment where Abraham, commanded to sacrifice his son, faces the absurd. Reason fails, ethics fail, and still he acts, not because he understands, but because he trusts. This kind of faith, Kierkegaard argued, is the highest form of human existence. But Kierkegaard's legacy isn't about religion alone. His ideas laid the foundation for later existentialists like Nietzsche, Heidegger, and Sartre, philosophers who, even when they disagreed with him, owed a debt to his insights about the individual, choice, anxiety, and meaning. He also left behind an entirely new way of writing philosophy, not through abstract treatises, but through pseudonyms, parables, and diary-like confessions. He was more poet than professor, more mystic than academic. And yet, during his lifetime, Kierkegaard was largely ignored. His books didn't sell well. He was ridiculed in the press. His spiritual insights were dismissed by the Danish church as eccentric or even dangerous. He died young at 42 after collapsing in the street. It wasn't until decades later that his influence began to be recognized and appreciated. Today, Kierkegaard's work remains deeply relevant. In an age of distraction, irony, and performance, he reminds us that the most courageous act might simply be to face ourselves honestly, to sit with our fear, our contradictions, our longing, and not run away. In Kierkegaard's own words, the greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur so quietly that it is almost like not losing anything at all. His message is not a prescription, not a system, but a challenge. Will you choose to live authentically? Will you take responsibility for your life? Will you leap? Because becoming who you are isn't a destination, it's a commitment, a constant becoming.